भुनक्तु सह नौ भुनक्तु सह वीर्यङ्करवावहै तेजस्विनावधीतमस्तु मा विद्विषावहै। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः।
The topic for the day is nature of human mind. See, those who have attended Swamiji's lecture or seminar on stress management, or for that matter, a couple of other topics also, this forms one of the key topics for him. It is one of his greatest contributions. When I say Swamiji, Swami Parthasarathi. And in his book of The Fall of the Human Intellect, this has also been dealt in detail. So we will be discussing along the same lines. Those who attended the Fall of the Human Intellect class recently, for them, you can take it as a revision. The great scripture Bhagavatam says that Mana eva manushyanam karanam bandha mokshayoho. Mana eva means mind alone. Manushyanam, for the people, for the men, for the people in general. Karanam is the cause. Bandha mokshayoho, for both bondage and liberation. Mind alone is the cause for one's bondage. The mind alone is the cause for one's liberation. So mind is an instrument that how it depends on how you use it, that it produces results for you. Mind is uniform for all in the sense that the law that the mind follows is universal in nature. All the Shastras that we read, all the classes that we attend, all the scriptures of Vedanta is finally giving us the message that your mind must be brought under control. That is why the interpretation of mind as a asura or Satan in Christianity or a shaitan in Islam makes sense. Because your own mind, when it is uncontrolled, it turns like Satan for you. It is the devil that is bossing over you. So in English they say that mind is a very good servant but is a very bad master. So if you allow the mind to master you, it creates all sorts of havoc. If the mind is kept under control, it can do wonders for you. So the whole idea is for us to develop the intellect and bring the mind under control. But before we do that, we need to understand how the mind operates. What is the nature of the mind? It is impossible to fathom the nature of the mind completely. But thanks to great masters and people like Swamiji, that they have sort of given us how it behaves, what are its qualities and tendencies. So this is quite universal in nature. The nature of the mind, what was in our, let us say, ancestors thousands of years ago, it is the same nature of the mind that we have now, and it will be the same nature of the mind that will be there in the future generations also. That is why the Sanatana Dharma, which is giving us the knowledge of the self in order to conquer this mind, that is also eternal. So the quality of the mind, what it is that we need to understand, as I said, it is very difficult. Now we are only trying to understand the theory of how the mind operates. But when we try to look at our own mind and see the qualities in us functioning, it is rather very difficult to spot it, even though we may have theoretical knowledge about it. But we shall first only aim to understand how the nature, how the mind functions. See, the first and foremost quality of the mind is that mind is constantly in a movement. Mind can never be in a place by itself. By itself, mind can never be in a place. And there are two types of movements that are attributed to the mind. In Sanskrit, they are called as asthira and chanchala. You can use the English words unstable and unsteady if you want. Both are more or less meaning the same. There is only a minor difference between the two. There are two types of movements. Movement is from place to place, and movement is also within a place. Animals and humans move from place to place because of their locomotive power, and trees move within a place. Animals and humans also have movements within the place. Like for example, hands move within a place, the legs move from place to place, but the trees have movements as they are rooted in one place. Exactly like that, mind has a free flowing movement from one topic to the other, one subject to the other. That is why mind is compared to a monkey. In Ramayana also, we can symbolically understand that the monkey forces were there to help Rama cross the ocean and conquer Lanka. These monkey forces were first under Vali, and then they were brought under Sugriva with the help of Rama. What it means is that the monkey represents the thought forces. The thought forces needs to be channelized, and Sugriva is a well-controlled person vis-a-vis Vali, who is a symbolic of lusty person. So what does monkey do? Monkey cannot sit in a place. Monkey has to jump from place to place. So in the zoo also, it has the biggest cage, probably after birds, because monkey cannot be confined in a small cage like a bear or something. So it moves from place to place. You can think of politics. Suddenly it will go to movie, it will go to sports, it will go to family, it will go to wherever it wants to go. It has no direction or dimension. It will go from place to place. But even if you tie the monkey to a place and make it sit in a place, it cannot remain constantly at one place. It will be fidgety in nature. It will scratch. It will do various other movements within that place also. Exactly like that. Even if you want the mind to be in one place, where you try to give it a focus, let's say in a class like this for an hour or so, or anywhere that you want to work and you want the mind to be there, even then it will not be quiet. For any small disturbance here or there, it will get distracted. It will be fidgety in nature. So by itself, mind cannot be in one place. It is in a constant state of movement. Now, what we have to remember is the nature of the mind, the points that we discussed, it is universal in nature. Universal in the sense, it is applicable for all people. In other words, this nature of mind being unsteady is applicable for Paramahamsa and Vivekananda also. But only difference is that they might have developed their intellect to a great extent or full extent that they can keep the mind wherever they want to keep it. So that is a difference. But left to itself, the mind will behave probably the same way across all people, across all continents, across all periods of time. This is how the mind is going to function. So the first is that mind is never in a place. It moves from place to place, Astira and Chanchala. So the next question arises as to where the mind moves. The usual movement of the mind is into the past or the future. So the theorem is that mind by itself cannot be in the present. Mind has to ramble into the past and future. Though there may be happy memories in the past also, and though there will be good hope in the future also, usually the mind's tendency is to catch on to those things which give worries from the past. So it constantly remembers what are the worries that are there, because of what happened in the past. And the mind is anxious about what is going to happen in the future. Very, very sort of result oriented. So it is by itself never in the present. See, all this nature of the mind also you can picturize and see how the movement of a small child is. It is nothing but a pure expression of the mind only. So the child cannot sit in a place. It has to be Astira and Chanchala. That is how. So, as Sunanda ji often says in her lectures, the mind in an adult also behaves like a child. So mind is exactly like a child. And by itself, you will find that, it cannot remain in the present. The mind always goes into the past or the future. It is worried about what happened in the past and anxious about what is going to happen in the future. This quality of the mind is what is responsible for draining our energy. So another corollary that we derive here is that physical tiredness does not happen due to action at the physical level. Work does not tire you. It is your mental, uh, worries and anxieties that tires you. Yes, when you do hard work at the physical level, the body may need rest in the form of sleep, but that's not the point here. A person will be enthused even to work more. But a person who is, let us say, working in an office, doing not much physical work also, maybe he is attending meetings and signing papers in an air-conditioned room, yet at the end of the day, he might feel very, very tired, possible, because his mind has been constantly in the movement with reference to past and future. Incidentally, this aspect is not seen in the child, because by nature, the child lives in the present, as it does not have a past or it does not know what future is. A child even doesn't bother about what the mother is going to cook for the dinner and feed. It is happily playing. When as it is playing, it is playing. When the time comes for dinner and mother feeds, she feeds. She is eating. That's about all. So, and by, as I said, by default, it does not have a past. It is just newborn and a few months old or a few 1 year old. It does not know what past is. It does not know remember what past is. So there is no chance of a worry from the past. There is no anxiety for what is going to happen in the future. So by itself, the child is able to live in the present. Therefore, we see that the child is having a lot of energy at its disposal. So when the child is throughout the day, it is running here and there and playing. At the end of the day, it is ready for more games. But this man who has worked in the office, who is probably more strong than the child, stronger than the child. Say, for example, if the child can lift 1 kilogram of weight, you can lift 20 or 30 kilograms of weight. That much strong you are. That much, energy you ought to have. But energy wise, what happens is, the child is having a lot of energy, it is ready to play more, but this man is tired that he cannot do any more activity and he feels extremely tired. This tiredness is not therefore caused by physical activity, because as I said, he is not done physical activity. The tiredness is caused by the worries and anxieties of the mind. Therefore, another corollary that we can derive is that if you are able to keep the mind in the present, we generate boundless energy. Another example or experience that you can think of is sleep. When you are sleeping, your body lies on the bed. You are not moving, not doing any physical activity. But let us say that night your sleep is disturbed. You are tossing in the bed, or some dreams, something is happening that you are not able to have deep sleep. Morning, when you wake up at the time that you normally wake up, you are definitely tired than usual. So if your body has not moved anywhere throughout the night and it is just lying in the bed, why should you feel tired? So it is very clear that tiredness is not due to physical movement, but due to your mind's activity. So when the mind flows by itself here and there, it drains away your energy. So that is the nature of the mind. But by itself, it cannot be in the present. It has to go into the past. It has to go into the future. To keep the mind in the present, in the chosen activity, is the art of concentration, and that requires intellect. But here we are only dealing with the nature of the mind. So the nature of the mind is that it will ramble into the worries of the past and anxieties of the future. Next, mind generates endless desires. Mind is like fire. Mind is compared to fire in this context. When you have any sample of fire, you can add more and more fuel to it, more and more logs of wood to it. It will consume everything. Bhagavad Gita uses the term Mahashanaha. Mahashanaha means all devouring, all consuming. Having consumed everything, it is ready for more. constantly it keeps on generating desires. In Ramayana, the character of Ravana is representative of this quality of the mind, that it is endless desires, and what is the nature of the desire that it will do to you. These characters are very interesting in terms of understanding the various facets of mind. Ravana represents desire. Hiranyakashipu, father of Prahalada, represents or symbolic of anger. Ravana also gets angry, but personification of anger is Hiranyakashipu. Surapadma represents the ego. Duryodhana represents jealousy. Like that, each and every character, a negative character in the epic who is the villain, is portrayed as that same villain sitting within you. In any form it manifests, it is going to destroy you. That's all it means. Ravana was a great character. He was in the Aranyakanda, where it is supposed to be full of a romantic period. There we see the valor of Ravana, but as it comes to Yuddha Kanda, where we should see valor, we see only the desire completely dominating his personality. He has, to his fulfillment, all the desires that can be fulfilled, whether it is wealth or whether it is woman, whether it is anything that he wants, it is at his beck and call. Having consumed everything also, now he wants one more thing, which can be Sita. And this is like endless. This desire in him finally consumes everybody around him and finally consumes him also, but the desire will not go. Tadapina munchati asha vayuhu, says Adi Shankaracharya in Bhajagovindam. Even if you are old and decrepit, your tooth have fallen and you are walking around with a stick, such an old man he describes, but he says as far as the desire is concerned, he is very young. Unfortunately, his body will not cooperate, but that's the nature of the desire. It is ready for more, it is ready to consume more. In the final stages of the war, Kumbhakarna is dead, his own son Indrajit is dead, and he is standing alone now, Ravana, but that time also the mind teases him that even now if Sita says, okay, all the losses are compensated. That is how the mind will be there. That desire consumes finally him. That is like a fire. It generates endless desires in the sense, I think this story that Swamiji narrates is given in one of the books also, or you would have heard him in lectures, that desire that we see outside seems to be sort of limited or one or two, but hidden behind that is a series of desires, and that series is also not some finite series. It goes on ad infinitum. There is no end to that series. So it is endless. So you imagine a boy, a bachelor boy, who has got everything in life what anyone can aspire for in the topmost level, quality, whether it is his strength, whether it is his education, he is number one, he is wealthy, he is strong, he is looking good, handsome, he is full of good character, he comes from a good family, and therefore his social circle is good. Everything about him is good. His activities are good, his character is good, everything about him is A+. Having got everything now and having attained the age of marriage, that is the only thing that is he thought is missing in his life, is a partner. And he was really a great bhakta. He believed in God, and he believed everything that he has got is by the grace of God. So when he wanted a partner, he thought this also must be God's choice, God's grace and God's selection, so that it will be complete and fulfilled. So the story is that he goes to heaven and asks and meets God, and God is asking that what he wants. So he is saying that by your grace I have got everything, only one thing is missing now, and that is desire for the partner, wife. So God immediately grants him and says, Tatastu, it will be granted. It is granted. So he asks, do you want anything else? So this person immediately says, this boy says, nothing else. Everything is provided. This alone is missing. and thank you, he says. He comes down and there's a girl fixed for him. He knows that it is God's choice, and probably the girl is one of the best match for him. So the marriage is over and there is a happy couple now, and there is a fulfilled married life for a while. Let's say after 1 year, 2 years, usually we see people, they may go to astrologer, they may go to temple, they may go to doctors. All these things happen because they are not having any child. So this is the case with this boy also, that after a couple of years, since there is no child, they are slightly worried. Wife is a very intelligent girl, so she tells the husband that you got me because of God's grace, so why don't you go to God and ask for a child, he will give. So he says, yes, that is definitely possible, but last time when I met him, he asked me, do I need anything? I said no. So I came back, how can I go and ask? So she says, see, we are all humans, we make mistakes. You go and confess your mistake, he will forgive you and he will grant you the boon. Are you ashamed? No, I'm not ashamed. So he goes up and meets God again. The God asks, yeah, what do you want now? So he says, by your grace, everything is there. The final thing that is missing is a child for us. So we request you to grant us that bliss also. So God immediately says, Tathastu, that is also granted. Now he asks, do you want anything else? Now he thinks for a while and he calculates everything, and apart from this, everything else is provided. So he says, that's all, thank you. But now he thinks for a while, but he has nothing else to ask for. He comes down, the wife is conceived, and they get a nice child. But what happens is that they realize after few months only that there is no voice coming out of the child, that the child is not able to produce noise, dumb. So the wife is very confident and she says, you go to God again, he will grant it. So her formula is very clear. But this boy now says that I will not go to God. She is asking, are you ashamed or afraid? It could be another mistake that we made. He says, this is not a mistake. When I go to him, I really do not know what to ask. So based on my request, the child will give voice to the child. But what is the guarantee that when the child speaks, it will speak sense? So when the child, if it says, shut up to the father and mother, then they have to run to God again to ask him to put some sense into the child. So sense maybe also be put. So like that, it all started with one desire of marriage. But if you analyze in the story, is it just one desire? No. So when the boy asked for a girl, it is not a girl alone that he wanted. He wants a girl who will produce the child. You may consider, yeah, that is obvious, but that is not obvious. At the time of the desire, we thought it is what it is. This is what it is, nothing more. But when the thing is fulfilled and that becomes small, something else pops up which was hidden behind it. And what is hidden behind it is not a finite number. That is the point that we need to note. So he wanted a girl who will produce a child, not that. A girl who will produce a child who will talk. A girl who will produce a child who will talk and who will talk sense. Who will talk and who will talk sense and who will live longer. Like that, how much it is ad infinitum. We may not be able to analyze everything there, but it is all hidden deep behind it. And this nature of your mind is going towards infinity. So this is the nature of the mind that we need to understand. We are not talking about whether or not you should have desire. We are not talking about what kind of desire you should entertain or not entertain. We are only saying that every desire has a potential for extending itself towards infinity. It is endless that way. So one of the qualities of the mind is that it is endless. You can take any example. It can be proven to your satisfaction that what you are actually seeking is what not you really want. In other words, the theorem that we can derive here is, we really do not know what we want. We really do not know what we want. We believe this is what it is. We believe this is what it is. But when that occurs, no, not this, something else, something else. It goes on like this. We are exactly clear of what we want. See, when Swamiji was explaining this in a seminar, he was, because this is a very tough concept, and people are asked to chase their desires. This is the modern management philosophy. You need to be greedy, you need to develop your desires, and 2008 proved that what all that can do in downtown in America particular. This is what is taught, that you are that you have to promote your greed, that you need to promote your desire. At the same time, we cannot be without desire also, but how to direct the desire, how to desire itself is a lesson that Vedanta teaches. How to grow over the desire, that comes later. But the point is, we do have desire, we need to understand the nature of the desire. So this person in the seminar, he objected, or not objected, he raised a clarification to Swamiji and said, sir, I am not able to understand. You are saying that you do not know what you want, but I am pretty clear of what I want, because he was running a printing press, and he had asked, he has studied the market, and that there is a good demand for 5-color printing jobs, and he needs to import the machine from Germany, because the best machines are available there. He has applied loan from the bank, so he says everything else is well set. I need, all that I desire now is that the loan needs to be sanctioned. That's all. Everything else is there. I don't need anything else. Market is there, working is there, workforce is there, my know-how is there. Everything is there for me to move forward. All that I require now is that the loan has to be sanctioned. That's all. So Swamiji said, assume that I have the power and I sanction the loan to you. It's granted. But then what happens is, like, 2017 or 16, one night suddenly the Prime Minister Narendra Modi announced Notebandi, that all the higher denomination notes are to be out of circulation. So such announcements can come suddenly overnight. Like that, there was devaluation that was announced of a rupee in 1990s. So he said, after the loan is sanctioned, if there is a devaluation of rupee announced, what will happen? Suppose if the loan sanctioned is 10 lakhs, and 10 lakhs will be sanctioned, but that 10 lakhs is not worth 10 lakhs anymore. It is only 1 lakh. And that will not be equivalent of what you want to pay the German in his mark or euro currency. So then this person said, no, sir. It is definitely understood that the government should not demonetize now. Swamiji said, it is not understood. It cannot be taken for granted. Your desire is that loan has to be sanctioned and the government should not demonetize also. And then he said, is that all? Yeah, I think that's all. No. Loan is sanctioned. There's no demonetization. But suddenly there is the diplomatic relations between Germany and India cut off. And halfway the machinery is coming, it is turning back and going to Germany again. How is that? If there is a war between, it need not be a war also between India and Germany. In 1998, there was Pokhran blast that India conducted, based on which various countries impose sanctions. Like that, if Germany imposes sanction and there is no trade relationship between the two countries, suddenly what happens to your mission? Oh, that should not happen. That desire is there. And then what happens? When the ship is there, everything is all right, there is a cyclone. What happens? You may be insured, but you will not get the machinery on time and interest on the loan will go up. No. There should not be any natural calamity also. All these are inherent desires hiding behind that one desire, that I need only the loan sanction. And how much is this? Even if it is 100, even if it is 1000, it is justified. It is not so. It is ad infinitum. So the nature of the mind is that it generates endless desires. Next, mind is a bundle of likes and dislikes. Likes and dislikes is the quality of the mind where we are having within us tendencies to like something or not like something, which is not based on any reason or logic, because reason and logic comes in the realm of intellect. I like blue color, I don't like green color. Why? You cannot ask why. That is my preference. I like this particular sweet, Sandesh sweet, not Rasagula sweet. Why? That is my preference. That is my like. I don't like Sachin Tendulkar. I should not say today. Today is a birthday, isn't it? I like Sachin Tendulkar. I don't like Saurav Ganguly. Why? That is my like. That is my dislike. So these are the things that are inherent in a person. But what is interesting is, the so-called well-wishers, like our parents, like the relatives and friends, they keep on feeding this likes and dislikes more and more, to an extent that before you grow into an adult, it forms a big motor in your personality that drives you from experience to experience. So we may ask, what of it? What is wrong with having a like or a dislike? Having a like or dislike per se is not wrong, but when it becomes powerful enough so that your actions are decided by the likes and dislikes, that is where tragedy is. So your decisions cannot be made based on your like or dislike. If you are a person who is sitting in the position of interviewing for your company, and a person comes, you need to dispassionately look at his qualification for the job, whether he will fit in for the benefit of your organization, your department. No, the sight of that person I don't like, or you have some old connection with him you like. Either you like him or you don't like him. If you are going to base your decision on that, that may prove disastrous. A person who likes to eat sweets when he ought not to eat sweets, like a diabetic patient who is in advanced level, he ought not to eat sweet, but he likes to eat sweets. That decision could prove detrimental for him. Not only that, we'll discuss it in the next point. A like beyond a point in a particular area unnecessarily develops a dislike where the other person has not given you any chance for dislike. This is what will happen. Sir, most of the this generation of youngsters who started watching tennis would have been probably a Federer fan or Nadal fan, whoever it is. Now, a person who likes Federer, he likes his game to support your player is fine, nothing wrong with it. But if the like of the Federer is to such an extent that you don't realize, without your wanting, this person starts to dislike Nadal and it develops into a hatred. There is no opposite for love, but there is opposite for like. Raga has an opposite dvesha. Attachment has an opposite aversion. Love is unconditional, it's universal, it doesn't have opposite. People talk about love and hatred. It's in technical sense, I'm saying we don't understand how they use the term love and hatred, but it's not love and hatred. It is attachment and aversion. Hatred is the other side of your preferential attachment, this side. So what happens when it grows to a great extent? You can take the example of those who are in the previous generation, they will know two great tennis players. Steffi Graf was a great tennis player. Many of us were Steffi Graf fans, you know. And then there came a challenger in 1990s in the form of Monica Seles. Monica Seles was also a very great player. And like how Nadal is like a nemesis for Federer in some areas in or good portion of the career, Seles was like that to Steffi. Steffi was an outstanding player. She conquered all territories. Like that it was. To borrow a physics term, they say she had no surface tension at all. In every surface, she was the winner. But Monica Seles began to show her authority over her. And one of the Steffi Graf's fans could not take it. So what happened is that he jumped onto the court and stabbed Monica Seles on her back, after which she had to take a long rest. When she came back to court again, she was not her old self. This was very clear. Now, all this happened because of this person's intense like for Steffi Graf. What has Steffi Graf got to do with him directly? Maybe no connection, but that is how the mind will operate. So be very careful about the intensity of your like or dislike. And when it gets converted into your decision and action, it is very, very detrimental. You know, all over India, people have craze for film fans, and particularly in South India, it is much more. We have had rulers of states from film industry, particularly in Tamil Nadu and Andhra. And there is so much craze. At every stage, there are a couple of people, two camps are there, this camp, other camp. In our earlier generation, my father's generation, it could be Shivaji Ganeshan and MGR. In our generation, it is Rajinikanth and Kamal Hassan. Now it could be somebody else. Like that, it continues. Now, when these, you know, the camps are formed according to the movie stars, and they have their intense fan following, being a fan for the stars. You can say anything about even their father or mother, but you cannot say anything about Rajinikanth or Kamala Hassan for that matter, for this group. Like that it is. And then that brings out their anger, that brings out their hatred, that brings out everything. Now, what has Rajinikanth or Kamala Hassan got to do with your real life? They are screen appearances. If they entertain you, see the movie and carry on with your work. But an intense like or dislike can drive you mad. You have to be very careful about this nature of the mind. To have a general like, to have a general passion is good. It's good in the sense it's okay. Everybody has their own preferences. So for that matter, you need not. I think somebody is having a chat. I will, if it is a question, I'll come back at the end of it. Yeah, correct. Rajat Hor says in football it's Mohan Bagan and East Bengal, right? That's how it is. So it turns out into a very intense rivalry because of that. So not only that, what I wanted to say. Okay, so the point is you cannot base your actions on like or dislikes. The decisions should not be made based on your likes or dislikes. To have a like, this is what I wanted to say. So that does not mean that from now on we do something that we dislike or we eat something that we dislike. That's not the solution. The solution is to place your like or dislike under the scanner of your intellect. And then whatever intellect sanctions, your decision or action should be based on that. But mind per se is a bundle of likes and dislikes, and avoid at least catering to other person's likes and dislikes indiscriminately to the extent that it pampers them or it spoils them, particularly after we have grown. At least in a child, we do not know when we are getting pampered. As after adult, it could be that the partners cater to each other likes and dislikes, and this makes both of them dependent on each other, and it is not going to be a very easy movement. And that is what is leading us to the next quality of the mind, which is attachment. Mind has a tendency to get attached to objects and things. Attachment is a deadly quality of the mind. Attachment is an invisible rope that binds you with the object or a being. Imagine that you are sitting on a chair and you tie yourself with rope to the chair. It is a pain for you. When you get up, the chair also gets up. This is what is attachment. It is very clear as far as physical attachment is clear. That is the rope. But mentally, we bind ourselves with various objects and beings, and that rope is invisible. Invisible rope of the mind is the attachment. What is tragic here is all this is also done in the name of love. Love is opposed to attachment. Yes, attachment seems like love, but attachment is polluted love. When love is polluted by selfishness, it is attachment. So you cannot say that there are only few drops of poison in the cup of milk. It is still not called milk. It is called poison. Exactly like that. That small and attachment, when it grows powerfully within your system, it is no more called as love. It is called as attachment. And attachment is a pain both for you and the person to whom you are attached. A person catches hold of his horse with a rope, and he is very proud of his horse, and he is standing in the middle of the road and telling everyone that it is my horse, it's my horse. And some are admiring and some are not caring, and they are going, but he is very proudly announcing to everyone that this is my horse, this is my horse. So a Mahatma then passes through the road, and to him also he boastfully says that this is my horse. So he patiently listens and says, son, how do you say it's your horse? Don't you see, I hold it. It cannot run. I hold its ropes. Then he says, carefully think about it. The horse cannot run away from you. That is correct. But can you run away from the horse? That is also not possible. To the extent that you hold the horse also holds you. This is what attachment is. To the extent that you are attached to any object or being, to that extent that object or being also holds you. We don't realize this. That is why attachment becomes a burden on another person. Swamiji is, those who have heard any lecture of Swamiji in the last 10 years or so, in some form or the other, he harps on this point, and he has even written a book on it called as The Holocaust of Attachment. People don't understand that we talk about, he says, the SARS virus and the coronavirus and bird flu and swine flu, which is, yes, you need to take care of yourself against that. But this virus of attachment is more universal. It affects everybody, whether he is a rich or a poor person, whether he is a literate or illiterate person, whether he is a man or a woman or an American or a Japanese or Indian. Everybody is afflicted by this. To something or the other, we are attached. Yeah, universally, there are common things that we get attached to. We can say name, fame, position, family, status, power, money. All these are common attachments. But it can be one of this or many of this, or it could be anything other than this also. But the tendency of the mind is to get attached. Tendency of the mind is to get attached means you get involved in it in such a way that you have a personal benefit out of it. That is what is attachment. So it cannot be unselfish in nature. Attachment cannot be looking at from the other person's point of view. It is purely from your point of view. That is why when children are pressurized by the parents, they tolerate up to a point because they have no choice. But when they grow into teenagers, they want to wriggle out of the parental control because of the feeling of the burden, and this burden is nothing but attachment. So whenever there is an attachment, there is invariably pain. Whenever there is even small detachment, to that extent there is pleasure. There is no worries, at least to that extent. See, when a person is attached to his car, even if the car is parked somewhere, one aspect of him is bound to the car. So he is looking whether somebody is leaning on the car, or a crow is sitting on the car, or something is happening. This is what. So he is not peaceful where he is. Or if even as he travels in the car, wherever the car hits a bump or a speed breaker, it hits him. It hits his heart. So that is what attachment does. Whatever happens to the object directly affects you. It happens to you. When we have a new carpet in the house, when somebody comes with a wet feet, we are very, very anxious. What will happen to the carpet if we are attached to the carpet? That does not mean you don't take care of the carpet. That does not mean you don't take care of the car. But to the extent that we are attached to it, we will suffer because of it. On the other hand, take the example of a person who is traveling in an office car where it is not his car. So he feels detached and nothing happens when it goes into the bumper or a speed breaker or a pothole. He is carefree about it. What brings about this attitude of not getting affected? That is because he is detached from the car. It is not his car. Vedanta says you have to practice this with your own possessions. So you can have possessions, but you cannot have that possessiveness in the possessions. That is the challenge. This is the nature of the mind to get. See, what is interesting is our Shastras say about what is known as in the quality of Aniketa, homeless. Swamiji also explains. He says, treat your own house also like a rented house. Just as how you enter the hotel, you pay for it obviously, but you are enjoying all the facilities and amenities of the hotel, but you remember that you are here for a while, you will enjoy the facilities and then you have to go to your place. That's what it is. So while you are there, you enjoy, and after that you just forget about it. You cannot say all the facilities where it is gone. It is not yours. Like that it is. But the tragedy is now people are treating rented house like their house. And being in Calcutta, we know maybe that problem is not there anymore. But those who have had their own houses and they had to sell it for the tenants, they will know what all they went through. The tenants treat the rented house as their own house. Now, what is the context here is, it says, this body in which you are staying is like a rented house. You have come here for a while, you will stay here for a while and you will go away. Why don't you treat this as a rented house? No, we treated this as our own house, and all the attachments are because of the main attachment, which is to the body only. It all starts from there. Any other attachment is related to the body. But this is the tendency of the mind. The tendency of the mind is that it will get attached to objects and beings. You have to maintain a distance for any relationship. That's all. So detachment is nothing but maintain a distance, allow that freedom and independence to the other person. So you you understand and allow them to be what they are, not what you would want them to be. The world cannot fit into your mental pattern, however right it is. That you have to understand. There is a Panchatantra story which talks about a friendship between a frog and a rat. To be friends is good, but what this frog said was, we have to prove our friendship. We have to be always friends like this. So therefore, what we will do is, we will tie one of our legs to each other. So they brought in a rope and they tied one of the legs to each other so that they are always together. So wherever they will eat together, they will go together like that. They were thick friends like that. One day what happened was that eagle from above spotted the rat. So it was coming down to catch the rat. The frog also saw this. In the instinct of saving itself, it jumped into the nearby pond. The rat obviously could not survive in water. After a while, it struggled and it died because it was tied with the frog. And then what happened was that the dead body of the rat started floating on the pond. So when it was floating, it was very easy pickup for the eagle, that it came up and picked up the rat. When the rat was being picked up, what happened was the frog also went along with it. This is a very interesting story to say what is the devastating nature of attachment. Ultimately, it kills both. Swami Ramatirtha's statement that we need to remember always, he says, it is an irrefragable law that anybody who attaches himself to any object or being has to suffer. Has to suffer. He is not cursing, he is only stating a law. He says, either that object will be taken away, or there will be a rupture in the relationship, or that person will die. He says, depending on the degree of your attachment. Either that object will be taken away, you yourself see, wherever any car or anything that you are overly attached to, there will be immediately a scratch. Anything that you want to protect much more and you're always looking after it, something or the other, it will slip out of your hand, mobile will fall down, something will happen. This is nothing but your attachment. And there will be rupture in relationship. So much they had romance and love before the marriage, and why are they not able to have that continuity in the relationship? It was not also real love, but it was okay. But you need to understand and move further in evolution of love. So it starts with the family, but it has to expand further, as we discussed in the previous class. Or he says there will be death, because the other person has no other choice but to die to get away from you. That is how you are pressurizing him. This is the effect of attachment. This is not really to scare any of us, or it's not like a curse as is pronounced. It is to just caution us the effect of attachment. So what you need to do is extend the same love. You have to love the other person for his own sake, not for your own sake. As simple as that. If you are able to see the self in the other person, that turns out to be a true love. Brihadaranyaka Upanishad says, Atmanastu kamaya sarvam priyam bhavati. You like everything only because you like the real self. Atmanastu kamaya sarvam priyam bhavati. Everything in this world is likable and lovable for you because you love the real self. If a person is going to place reality value in his son and love the son for the sake of the son, he will be cheated by the son. If a person places the reality value on his wife like that, there is going to be like that. He will be cheated by the wife. Cheated by the wife means not that she is going to run away with some other person. There will not be a happy relationship with the wife. Same thing with reference to money. Same thing with reference to anything for that matter. Whenever there is an attachment, there is going to be disaster. And this is the nature of the mind. We are only talking about nature of the mind. When a person develops intellect, obviously there is going to be detachment. And detachment comes only because of higher attachment, which is not the subject now. Then next, since time is up, we'll take the next three qualities together because they are connected. In the Bhagavad Gita, 6th chapter, Arjuna talks about these qualities of the mind, and he compares mind to wind. He says, Pramati balavat dridam. Pramati, it can be violent, it can turn turbulent. Pramati. Balavat, very powerful, very strong. Dridam, very unyielding, very obstinate. And he gives this example to say that mind is like a wind. The wind is also insubstantial like the mind, but wind is very violent. It can uproot trees. It is very powerful when cyclone occurs. And the wind is powerful enough, strong enough to uproot trees, and it can do everything. And unyielding and obstinate. If you try to block the wind with a window or something like that, it constantly tries to get in through any small hole also if it sees. Consistently it is there at it again and again till it breaks the window and it shatters the entire thing. Like that is the mind. Unattended mind can turn violent, turbulent. We see heinous crimes like rape, murder, various other negative things are happening. All that is a product of that person's mind. He has not cared to attend to his mind, and that has come to this extent that it has turned violent. It is powerful enough to transform persons or situation. Yes, there's a beautiful example in Mark Antony's oration in Julius Caesar drama of Shakespeare. Brutus had a powerful mind. So having killed Caesar along with other villains, Casca and others, Brutus had this powerful mind and a powerful oratory skill by which he convinced the people of Rome that he had killed Caesar for the good of Rome. Not that I loved Caesar any less, but I loved Rome more, he says. And he brings everybody under control. He makes everybody believe that what he has done is really good for the state. That is where he stands. So his mind was powerful enough to transform. After that, he leaves the scene, which was his mistake, and gives the platform for Mark Antony to speak. And Mark Antony also had a powerful mind. Within about 10-15 minutes of his powerful oration, which we see in the form of movie, those who in YouTube also you can see. And I think Marlon Brando's terrific performance in the old classical Julius Caesar. He gives the famous speech, starting with friends, Romans, and countrymen, and slowly, by his power, his psychology, he brings the mob to the other side. He takes complete control and turns them against Brutus and other conspirators. That is the power of the mind. So, if your mind is can be taken over by other, this is what hypnotists do. If they are able to get that strength in them, they can do to others who are weaker than them. Like that it is. So mind has that powerful tendency to transform situations, and unyielding and obstinate. Mind will be at it like pig-headed quality. It is again and again, whatever reason, whatever logic you may say, but once that person is caught up in it, the mind will not budge here or there. It is that tendency of the mind to be unyielding, obstinate. Lastly, as I said, this is not exhaustive. These are some points that we have derived mostly from what Swamiji has taught us. There could be other tendencies and qualities also, but this gives a fair amount idea of how the mind functions. The mind teases you. It gains more strength as you succumb more. See, people are caught up in certain superstitions of the mind. And more you yield to the mind, it teases you more and more, and that gives the strength to the mind. Swami Vivekananda was walking in Kashi. One or two monkeys started following him. Suddenly he thought why they are following him, and he started walking fast, little bit afraid of them. Group of monkeys joined, and as he moved faster, these monkeys started chasing him more. And after a while only he thought suddenly, why am I running from these monkeys? What is there to be afraid of? Suddenly he turned around and said, halt, and all the monkeys ran away. So the strength of the monkeys came from the so-called weakness of that time, where you can see it in happening. Either we used to have pigs or goats on the streets. The pig or the goat starts running when the dogs chase. As the pigs runs faster, the dog gains more strength and they start chasing. But suddenly the goat or the pig, where there's nowhere to go, suddenly turns around, the dogs run away. So the strength of the dogs comes from the weakness of the pig only. Like that it is. The strength of your mind comes from your own weakness. There are some people who, while watching cricket, let us say, they sit in one place and other place they go and the wicket falls, and there they see it as a good omen. So he sits there till the end of the match thinking that the wicket has fallen because he has sat in that particular place, and others also don't allow him to go. Even if he wants to go to bathroom, he cannot do that, and while you are sitting in a sofa, what has that got to do with somebody playing a match somewhere? But that's how the mind operates, and it will make you, more you succumb to it, more you yield to it. We discussed this during last week of blind faith also. That's how it is. Mind teases you. There was a person who would do everything 2 times, 3 times, because the mind tells him that if he does it in the first place, there will be something tragic that's going to happen. In other words, he will go inside the house, come out, go inside, come out, and again force himself to go in. Because if he goes inside the first time, the mind says his family will be dead or something like that. It may be a joke for us now, but you have to look at it from that person's point of view. He has that sort of a grip of the mind over him, and being a successful person, a good amount of energy goes out like this. It was very difficult, and it's a real story that he came to our Swamiji, and Swamiji gave him means and ways how to get out of it, and he got out of it. It took a year, but he got out of it. But the point is, we are all caught up in some weakness or the other, something, some superstition or the other, which has no reason or logic. But when we are caught up in it, the mind plays with you. The mind teases you. The more you yield to it, the more it will tease you. So you have to take the stance that come what may. That stance you take, and take the shelter of the intellect. That is where we can control the mind. But we are only saying this is the nature of the mind. As I said, this is not exhaustive. This nature of mind is universal. All that is required to bring the mind under control is a strong intellect. Therefore, the lessons that we do, whether it's Fall of Human Intellect, Vedanta treatise, Bhagavad Gita, Upanishads, or whatever you do, ultimately the aim of the scripture is to develop the intellect so that you can gain control over your own mind. Yeah, thank you very much. We will open up to questions. Just a minute. You can unmute yourself from your end and ask. Otherwise, it is muted from my end. Or you can put it in the chat also if you want.
Sir, Hari Om, I have a question.
Yes.
Sir, in the current situation, when there's so much information coming in, good, bad, all kind of information, how do you protect your mind from absorbing this information? Even if your intellect is at work, but the inflow of information from people around you, sir, it's always a matter of discussion more than half the time. So how do you protect your mind then?
Correct. See, the thing is, most of the time there is a flood of information coming, and we do not know even what is right and what is wrong. And we, even as you say, as the intellect is at work, what you need to understand is, as the intellect at your level is at work. See, suppose I am trying to use my intellect, but my intellect is developed only to the extent of, let's say, 10%, 15%.
Yes.
Okay. So anything that is below that, anything at that level, I'll be able to discern, I'll be able to control it. It is fine. But when it is something above me, and when the information that I need to analyze or think about is not, it's above it, I will not be able to do it.
Yes.
So I would say first and foremost thing is that we need to devote time to develop the intellect, which is the early morning study and reflection. That's what we need to work on.
Yes.
And there is no need for you to flood yourself with information from all quarters at all points of time in all subjects. One of the things that has happened because of the technology is that world enters us in a very fast pace and in a very high frequency at all points of time.
Yes.
Not just from our friends and relatives, but it could be Facebook, it could be WhatsApp, it could be YouTube.
Yes.
We are flooded with information. There's no need for any news channel at all. Even then, we are acquainted with any news that's even happening in a remote corner of Africa or America also. So
Yes.
we need to insulate ourselves from getting the right type of stimuli. So therefore, try to devote as much time as possible. So in other words, first of all, we need to have a schedule or plan or a program as to, so for example, let's say If I'm interested in cricket, I might want to know a score about it. Okay.
Yes.
If I'm interested in politics, I will want to know who has won or something. But
Yes.
if election result is getting declared on a particular day, though there is a strong tendency to see who is winning or not winning, if I have something solid to do that day, I need not sit in front of the television to see what is happening to each and every candidate at every point of time. So I can once in a while check the result, right?
Yes.
Like that, you need to filter the information, and for which I would say, unless we have solidly something to pursue, something solidly to look forward to, the mind will have tendency to be extroverted and get all the gossips or information or anything for that matter. See, somebody
Yes.
will say even good things like what you must eat, let's say healthy food. But even this healthy food, there are people who say eat only 2 times a day. There are people who say, intermittently eat 6 times a day. There are people who say only fruit juice you drink. There are some
Yes.
who say drink milk, don't drink milk.
Yes.
And we do not know who to follow. Okay.
Yes.
It is better to get stuck on to one person who you understand, who is a doctor, and based on your tradition, whatever you have.
Yes.
So it's like that it is. So you need to be clear of also as to who to follow, who to read in the areas of your ignorance. And that area of ignorance also must pertain to what is relevant for you. So how a particular meal has to be cooked, I need not know that now if I'm not cooking, like that
Yes.
it is. So you need to filter at that level. That is at the entry level. But main thing is to develop the intellect to discern and understand also. So two things here. First is to who to follow and what information to do. That also needs a basic level of intellect. And
Yes.
second is how to analyze and derive that useful data from it. That requires intellect at the second level.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah. Can human be compared to a monkey mind under control where it has surrendered to the higher? Sorry,
Hanuman, sir.
sorry, Hanuman. Yes, Hanuman can be compared to the monkey mind under control. It's very beautiful analogy that you brought in. You are right. I'll take just 5 minutes, but it's a very interesting thing that I need to relate to, which Swamiji also feels inspired when he says in the class. In the Tamil Ramayana, which is Kamba Ramayana, which is the oldest Ramayana after Valmiki Ramayana. And a beautiful, it is as big as Valmiki Ramayana. As big in the sense, if Valmiki Ramayana is 48,000 verses, this is 40,000 verses. Like that, it's a Mahakavya. In that, in the Sundarakanda, Sundarakanda is the only Kanda where you don't find the hero. Hero is Rama. Rama is not there. There, it is only Hanuman going to Lanka and coming back. In terms of time, that's the shortest Kanda, but it's considered the most holiest of the portions. That's why those who recite Ramayana, they recite at least this Sundarakanda portion. And in that Tamil Ramayana, it ends with Hanuman meeting Rama, and he says, it's beautifully given in Tamil that first he says, Kandain Sita. Kandain means I saw first. He gives that Hanuman is very famous for uttering things. He knows how to say the things in the right way to the right people at the right time. So he will not even say Sita was seen by me. I am trying to translate in English, which will not make sense. So when you say Sita, even that small portion, whether he saw or not, should not be there. So first he says, I saw Sita, like that he says to Rama, and then he praises Sita and he says that being in Ashokavana all by herself, she is upholding the entire universe by her tapas. By her tapas, she is upholding the entire universe. She is adding glory to your race, Rama, which is Dasharatha's family and Ikshvaku race. She is adding glory to the race where she was born, which is to Janaka's family in the kingdom of Mithila. She is adding glory to the gods and goddesses. She is adding glory to everybody. And finally, he says, En kulatte yanakku thandal. En kulatte yanakku thandal means she also is glorifying my family trait. She has given my family trait back to me. What is interesting? She has just now only seen a Vanara maybe in this form of Hanuman, or Hanuman has just now only seen Sita, and Hanuman says, she gave my family trait back to me. What does it mean? There are so many interpretations. What it means is, the tendency of Hanuman or a monkey is to be chanchal, always. So the mind was flowing here and there all the time. But Hanuman got fixated and he will never waver at all from the point he saw Rama. Rama was the only God and he is the God for him. So he got into a fixation. Fixation is not the nature of the monkey. Now when he saw Sita again, she got this family trait back into him, that he's again become wavering now. He is now confused whether who is greater, Rama or Sita. And therefore I got my family trait back, that I am always in a chanchal mode now. That way he is glorifying Sita. So you can say that a person completely surrendered to the higher can be compared to Hanuman. But I just gave an extension to that story. Yeah. Yeah, Srinidhi, what's the question?
So my question is not really related to the mind. It's about dealing with children under the current situation. They are not really fruitfully occupied, because obviously they are not having as much activity or whatever that they are doing under other circumstances.
You are talking about the lockdown period now?
Yes, yeah, sir.
Okay.
For the lockdown period only. So, sir, I'm always having this question of where is the balance between, discipline and allowing them to do things which are out of normal. Because, it started with a 20-day, now it's become longer, and I foresee it being even longer until school really starts for them. So,
how are you fruitfully engaging yourself?
So, sir, I'm doing some online classes and engaging, doing online yoga, engaging.
Allow them to enjoy this lockdown period in a way that they want to enjoy. Let it be a summer vacation. Let them watch movies. Let them, and I know particularly what the age of your daughter is. Just don't too much control over them. You just allow her to be whatever she is, however she is. Let her read a little. Let her, have basic some exercises or something in the morning to have physical fitness. See, you are looking at this lockdown period as some 10 days, 20 days, 30 days. You will look at this same period 10 years later and say, how I missed that lockdown period. Huh? Lockdown period was so nice that I miss it now, is what you are going to say later.
I am already feeling in some ways that we will only miss it, because we are having so much of peace and quiet in a manner away from our regular activity. So we will only miss it. But sir, my question is for her, then it becomes like a 3-month extension of vacation. So then,
when is she going to get this experience anytime in his life in future? Tell me. She will be thankful in the future that there is no lockdown, because she knows what is going through now. Every experience is a learning experience. And what to say? Yes, certain things are in our control, certain things are not in our control. Okay, those things which are not in our control, you have to accept it as it is. Tasmat apariharyate natvam shochitum arhasi, says Bhagavad Gita. So those things which are not in your control, just leave it as it is. You try to, let's say, see these Ramayana serial or Chanakya serial. Upanishad Ganga you are seeing?
No, sir.
Try to see that, and you need not again force her, because if you force her, she is not going to see. Okay.
Yes.
But make sure that if she is around you or seeing that serial or something, she might get attracted to it. Like that it is. Let her chat with the friends. Let her be whatever she is. So it's not a big deal. And in the overall scheme of things, 20 days or 30 days is nothing. Practically nothing. Nothing to worry about as such.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hari Om.
Hari Om. We will meet on Sunday morning, which is on the Upanishad class. Yeah. No permission.
Purnamadah Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.